Hello, everybody. The film we are showing today revolves around the topics of identity. The main character, Daniel, is not allowed to become a Catholic priest by following the official path. So he dresses up and starts to minister anyway. What is the real and what is assumed or simply fake identity? The exhibition Fake for Real, A History of Forgery and Falsification explores this topic with different examples from the European history. Biographies and documents have been faked since the antiquity, usually to gain money and prestige, often at the expense of the others, but sometimes to save human lives. This was happening during the Second World War. Many thousands of people managed to survive the occupation thanks to fake identity papers provided by the clandestine organization. In other, less dramatic circumstances, forgers and impostors provide us simply with a good story. I am thinking here of the 17th century Frenchman who called himself George Psalmanazar and fooled also many intellectuals into believing that he was a newcomer from a distant island. To appear more credible, he not only changed his name, but wrote a fantastical account you can discover in our exhibition. His peculiar habits of sleeping always in the sitting position or eating raw meat became a vital part of his lifestyle. To what extent did he become whom he pretended to be? I think it is one of the questions we will be asking ourselves while watching the transformation we will see in the movie. Enjoy the screening and visit our exhibition as soon as it is possible, as soon as the museums in Brussels reopen. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to the online screening of Corpus Christi. Tonight's film is about a juvenile delinquent out on parole who poses as a priest in a small Polish village. It could have been the premise for a farce comedy or a very dark tale, but in Corpus Christi it turns into a story of human frailty, grief, and forgiveness. Jan Komasa and his screenwriter Mateusz Paciewicz have crafted a film about big issues. They tackle morality, guilt, and redemption, but they have managed to balance drama, pathos, and comedy, and the result is a film that is at once tragic and melodramatic. Corpus Christi was nominated for Best Foreign Picture, the non-English language film at this year's Oscars, but lost out to Parasite, but has garnered awards at various festivals. It won 2 prizes in Venice in 2019 and in Poland, where it won the Eagles, which are Poland's prestigious national film prizes. The phenomenon of fake priests, apparently impostors posing as priests, is something that happens quite often in small villages, not just in Poland, but worldwide. There have been cases of fake priests who preached in parishes for more than a decade before being exposed as frauds. For Corpus Christi, the filmmakers were inspired by a true story from 2011. A young Polish man named Patrick had posed as a priest, but after his true identity was revealed, the parishioners said they had actually preferred the impostor priest over their real priest. So the impostor in this film, renamed Daniel, is a true trickster figure. The figure of the trickster is always ambiguous and contradictory. He or she is good nor bad. He or she can shape shifts. In Corpus Christi, the shape shifting can be seen in the way Daniel dresses. The dress code of priesthood contrasts with the dress code of youth, and Daniel's persona changes the moment he slips into either costume. And finally, the trickster is also often a messenger or imitator of the gods. Again, this is quite relevant for Corpus Christi. Understandably, the idea to make a film, or to make a man of the cloth, a trickster figure, sat uneasily with the Catholic Church. First of all, because of the real-life examples of impostor priests, but also because fake priests or fake religious representatives question the most fundamental imperative of any religion, namely faith. faith in the authenticity and truthfulness of those who represent the cross, faith in spite of everything one knows. The Catholic Church refused cooperation for this film, and so the church scenes you will see were all digitally recreated. So the film has a fake priest in a digital church. It's a feast of fakery. Daniel is played by Bartosz Bielenia, who is perfectly cast as the juvenile delinquent / fake priest, because his physical appearance is at once imposing and passive-aggressive, but also fragile and angelic. His impossibly deep blue eyes are beautiful and chilling at the same time. He's reminiscent of other famous trickster figures in world cinema, such as, for example, Robert Mitchum in The Night of the Hunter, Danny Glover in To Sleep with Anger, Burt Lancaster in El Gantry, or Gérard Depardieu in Le Retour du Martin Guerre. After the screening, I will have a conversation about this film with Professor Kris Van Heuckelom, Professor of Polish Studies and Cultural Studies at the KU Leuven in Belgium. You are welcome to submit questions or thoughts in the chat function during the film or during our conversation. Enjoy the movie and see you later. Welcome to the after-screening discussion of Jan Komasa's Corpus Christi. I will talk with Dr. Kris Van Heuckelom, Professor of Polish Studies and Cultural Studies at KU Leuven, Belgium. He specializes in late modern Polish culture and has published several books, edited volumes and anthologies on the subject. His most recent book is Polish Migrants in European Film from 1918 to 2017. So welcome, Kris. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
We're very happy. Well, I have so many questions. I will start with a couple. I hope that people in the audience will have questions too. You are welcome to submit them. You have to use the online chat, of course, but a moderator will group your questions and send them to me, and I will hope that we'll be able to address several or most of them. But first, I have a question. So the film we just saw, Corpus Christi, it has collected important awards in Poland. Maybe you will correct me, but I usually think of Poland as a very strict Catholic country with a low tolerance for blasphemy. How come a film with this kind of topic became so successful? Or maybe I am seeing it wrong. Maybe it's not as blasphemous as I might think.
Well, on the one hand, you're right. Of course, it is usually estimated that some 90% of the Polish population is Roman Catholic. And the church is a very important player in Polish society, not only historically speaking, but also in contemporary times. But over the past few years, the church has been increasingly under attack. So there is a growing polarization in Polish society. There is a strong anti-clerical stance on the left side of the political spectrum, and a strong pro-clergy attitude among conservative politicians, so on the right side of the spectrum. But I think most people are somewhere in the center, and they take up a more moderate and balanced position. And I think this is also reflected in Corpus Christi, because, well, the film obviously takes issue with the religious hypocrisy and all kinds of attempts to cover things up, such as the drinking problem of the priest, of course. Mm-hmm. But this is definitely not a black and white portrayal of the relationship or the position of the church in Polish society. And practically all characters have their strengths and flaws. So I think this is one of the main assets of the film when it comes to its positive reception in Poland.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it had this Renoir-esque quality. I noticed that too, that no character is completely evil or completely just good. There always there is a nuance. But the world in the film, so small town, Polish community, does this exist? Is this an exaggeration? Is this a place that you would say, no, this is actually the heartland of Poland?
Well, actually, the film is set in the southeast of Poland, in a province that is called Podkarpacie, which is known to be the heartland of Polish Catholicism. So in the past few elections, the governing right-wing party, Law and Justice, they had massive support, and the largest support in this region. So it's perhaps not a coincidence that the filmmakers decided to locate the action of Corpus Christi exactly in this region, because it's known for its very conservative and Catholic stance in all kinds of issues. So in that sense, you could say that it's realistic. On the other hand, I think as a film, it's pretty generic in narrative terms, in the sense that this is typically an example of a close-knit community. There is an established order, and then an outsider, an intruder, comes in, disrupting the established order, which is a very generic syntactic framework in film, and you can use it in a wide variety of contexts, filling it up with other semantic elements. Mm-hmm. There is, for instance, this interesting Belgian film from a couple of years ago, The Indringer, The Intruder, which it's quite the same narrative. It's about somebody from the outside entering into a local Wallonian small town. But there's not the religious or Roman Catholic element, because this is Belgium, so it's a very secular society. But it's actually the same narrative: an outsider disrupting the established order, mm-hmm. And putting all things into question.
Yeah. In my introduction, I mentioned that Daniel is something of a trickster figure. He's the impostor, the shapeshifter. Is it something that is typical, or does it appear in other cultural artifacts in Polish culture, or is it something that you didn't? I mean, I wonder, is it something that is typical for Polish literature or theater or folklore? So this kind of intruding character as such. Of course, it's, as you say, it's something that scenario writers use. It's a well-known dramatical structure. But is it something that you have encountered in different cultural?
Well, there have been some famous examples over the past few centuries, and some of these examples also have been treated recently by a couple of high-profile Polish writers. There is, of course, Olga Tokarczuk, the Nobel Prize-winning author, who mainly got the prize for her magnum opus, the Books of Jacob, which is actually about this kind of the main character is a charismatic Jewish leader living in the Polish borderlands in the 18th century, and then he manages to become. He proclaims himself as a Jewish messiah. He has a lot of followers, and at a certain point they go to Poland and they convert to Catholicism. So this was a very famous story in the 18th century. And after that, well, it turned out that he was an impostor, of course, like many of these self-proclaimed messiahs. In the 19th century, there was another very interesting case of a religious impostor, also related to Polish culture in those days. She's called Mother Makryna. She was a refugee from Russian lands, and at a certain point she ended up in Western Europe. Mm-hmm. And she posed as a nun who was suffering from persecution, oppression under the Tsarist regime, which strongly resonated with the Polish exiles living in Western Europe in those days, because they were also suffering from Tsarist oppression. And this story has been recently put into fiction by Jacek Dynal, and also a very important contemporary Polish author. And then perhaps a final example, which is also very well known in Polish culture. It's a book called The Career of Nicodemus Dyzma, which has recently been translated into English a couple of months ago. It's a novel from the interwar period about a very mediocre, ordinary man from the Polish provinces who moves to the capital and manages to climb up the social ladder in no time, thanks to his very blasé attitude. So this is a household name in Polish culture, Nikodem Dyzma. Also because this story has been adapted for the screen, I guess, 2 or 3 times. And the most recent adaptation was 15 years ago, I think. So another example of, in this case, not a religious imposter, but a political imposter.
They would have made interesting examples for the exhibition at the House of European History as well. Thank you for the examples. I have a first question from the audience. The question is, it's a difficult question. We just watched the film and it has a very violent ending. very powerful, a bit disturbing images. But the question from the audience is, how do you interpret the ending of the movie?
Well, I think on the one hand, you could say there is a positive ending. Daniel manages to serve as some kind of redeemer when it comes to this local close-knit community. So there is some kind of redemption taking place within this local community. But then there are others who decide to leave or are forced to leave. There is a daughter of Lydia, so the maid of the vicar, who eventually decides to leave. So this is a fate that befalls many young people in contemporary Poland. They move away from the countryside to the big city, or even they migrate, they go abroad. Mm-hmm. And I think the same holds true for the character of Daniel. He also manages to escape, and it's of course some kind of apocalyptic ending, because they set the building to fire. So it's the entire juvenile detention center is, let's say, cleansed by fire, and he manages to escape into the light, but we don't know where he's going. But it may be that he also decides to go abroad, or try to get out of this oppressive system in the Polish justice system. So, well, it's up to the beholder, I guess, to interpret the ending. I don't know how you understand the ending.
In a way similar, but I also thought it for me, it was a very depressive ending, because it shows that for him, there's only violence in the end. So there is a vicious circle, and he can maybe escape temporarily, but he'll always come back to this other side of his personality, because we've seen both, and I think he is both. He's capable of extreme, of being very good, and of giving himself and throwing himself into a community and working for a community, even without gaining something on a material level from it. But he's also, when he's provoked, as his friend is saying, because we know nothing, we don't know exactly what his crimes in the future and the past were, but they were violent, because he beat somebody to death. And I think he just did it again. We're not sure. I don't know what happened to Bonus, but it didn't look good. So I for me, it felt like both fates are inescapable. So it was a bit down. For me, it was a down ending. I think you have a bit more. You see the light at the end of his story, but for me, it was a bit more depressing. But again, it is an open ending in a way, and I think every beholder, everyone who watched the film tonight, will have his or her own thoughts about this. Let me move on to another question that was asked by somebody in the audience. What other social issues are dealt with in Polish cinema today? I think we saw this, but we saw also maybe issues of poverty. You talked about it's a small town community, and the daughter is leaving, but I'm thinking there's no job there. There's no real future for her anyway there. And a follow-up question from this same man or woman is, does this topic represent a particular trend, or is it special?
Well, I think that there are various trends in contemporary Polish cinema, and you could say that on the one hand, there is a very strong tendency towards escapist cinema. Mm-hmm. So the huge box office hits from the past few years, these are mainly romantic comedies set in big cities like Warsaw or Krakow, and focusing on very well-positioned inhabitants of these metropolises. So these are escapist films, and then the other current on the other side of the spectrum is very strongly social realist. So it focuses mainly on all the, let's say, the socioeconomic side effects of the transformation that took place after the fall of communism. Mm-hmm. And I think this film also partly relates to that, although poverty, precarity is not really the issue here. But there are many other films dealing with socioeconomic problems. So there is a very important social realist trend in contemporary Polish cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a way. So both are covered. You need. I don't think you can have the art house or the more socially concerned cinema without a commercial cinema that's quite healthy in order to keep it alive. There's somebody, and actually this is a comment that somebody sent, and it would have be very good to have it at the end of our previous question. And this person says that I quote, I very much liked the depiction of the dynamics of transformation of the main character. On the one hand, there is clearly a calling. On the other hand, he seemed to relish in the influence he had on the community. Yet this transformation is far from complete. I'm really impressed. So that's the comment. Mm-hmm. In a way that points or that connects with what we said earlier. But then an actual question, and I think we can both answer this, but I'll first offer it to you. What makes the movie strong cinematographically speaking, in your opinion?
That's a good question. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you should try to answer first, because
well, one of the things that I noticed and what I was really impressed by is that the filmmaker uses the same kind of lighting setup in the prison scenes or in the juvenile prison scenes and mm-hmm. the church. So there's strong light always coming in from the windows, and in both settings, they get the same kind of feeling. They're completely different, or they're supposed to be completely different, but still there is a connection. So I think the film has a kind of organic quality, even if both places are completely different. They still, you still feel that there is a connection, and maybe that is done purposefully. Maybe it sort of suggests that there is an easy way going from one place to the other, from the sacred maybe to the opposite of sacred. So that was something that I thought was well handled by the cinematographer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the editing is very dynamic, and as you say, at one point you're in a very quiet surrounding in terms of space, in terms of setting, and the next seconds you're in a very Trainspotting-like environment. People raving, very loud music. So it's that's also something very powerful in the film. I think it's not the same aesthetics all the way, but it shifts from various techniques.
I was always also impressed, or something that by the natural feel of the performances. So the main character. Bartosz Bielenia is very charismatic. You can't take your eyes off him, and I think that was also the case for the director, because he's dominating in the frame. But all the acting style, is that also typical for Polish cinema in general? Would you say? I thought it was kind of subdued, even in moments of big emotion. There was a.
Well, I must admit that I haven't seen an actor like him in the past few years. So I think he's quite extraordinary. He has a very pronounced facial expression, but he has I think he's capable of doing very different things. Whereas many Polish actors, they are typically typecast in some kind of role. Whereas in this case, also in this film, he is expected to play various roles in various surroundings, but he manages to adapt to these various roles also as an actor, which is quite amazing, I think. So he's generally considered as one of the rising stars of Polish cinema. This was his first main role.
He was a theater actor before, and then this big breakthrough, and I think it's an international breakthrough. I'm quite convinced of that. There's another question from somebody in the audience, and the question is: despite being a very Polish movie, Polish in like this, what makes it such an international success?
I think because it's very recognizable. So on the one hand, it is clearly rooted in Polish realities. There is this link to ongoing discussions about the role of the church, about all kinds of power abuse or cover-up operations. But on the other hand, like I said, it's a very generic narrative format, and I think anyone can relate to this kind of situation. I even heard that Polish film professionals are craving for a remake of a Polish film, and that has been going on since a couple of decades. And this is actually the first Polish film that will be probably made into another language production, because as I heard, the rights have been sold to an American production company. I'm not sure if it will be a film or a serial, but well, there is a huge chance that this story will be turned into an American production, which indicates that it's quite universal. If you change some of the local realities, then it's quite easy to relate to the circumstances, I think.
I can easily see the film taking place in the American South, in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. Small community. It's quite possible indeed. Okay, look, it's something to look out for. There's a theme in the film, and it's on different levels. It's a theme of mourning. It seems to me very important. I was reading a couple of interviews with the director, with Jan Komasa, and he mentions that Poland has been in mourning since the death of their president in a plane crash a couple of years ago. And he says that the church has been focusing on their role as in mourning and in grief and in mourning the dead. That is one of their most important function. Would you agree that mourning is something that Poland is sort of embracing that kind of sentiment? Is it a national sentiment? Would you agree?
Well, it's really important for the Poles. We shouldn't forget that today is the 11th of November, so it's the end of the First World War. But for the Poles, it means much more, because it's, like they call it, it's Independence Day, because the country was partitioned at the end of the 18th century, and then there was a period of more than 100 years of dependence, of being dependent on other powerful states. And only at the end of the First World War they regained independence. So there was a strong feeling of suffering and mourning throughout the 19th century. They lost their country, their state, and had to struggle for reclaiming independence. So this is something very familiar, I think, to Polish people. The feeling of being a victim or even a martyr. And I think this film also deals with this. It's a hugely debated topic in Polish society and in Polish politics, because how should one relate to this issue of becoming a victim, being oppressed by other nations, or in this case we have this duality between the victims and the perpetrators. So there was this guy who committed suicide, killing 6 young people at the same time, and this film is about leaving the position of being a victim or suffering, and trying to engage with the position of the perpetrator, who had all kinds of issues. And then we learn that the victims themselves, they were not holy cows either. So it's all about trying to relate to the other position and leaving one of the two positions, the perpetrator and the victim, and trying to come to some kind of reconciliation, which is also very crucial to contemporary Polish society, especially when it comes to this plane crash, because it was, of course, very tempting for instance, for Polish politicians to return to this position of being a victim, because there were other people responsible for the plane crash. It was not our fault. We're looking for those who are guilty, the perpetrators, while we remain in the position of innocent victims. And this is something quite dangerous. So this is a very topical debate in Polish society and Polish politics. And that's why I think the film so strongly resonated with Polish society, because you have these two camps. You have those who mourn, the relatives, and then on the other side, the widow, of course, of the so-called perpetrator. There is a very strong sense of polarization within this local community, and this becomes kind of allegory of the polarization that has struck Polish society after the plane crash.
Yeah, immobility on the one hand versus moving on, indeed taking up again and moving on. I have another question from the audience, and the question is: how can this movie resonate in Belgian society, as this country, historically speaking, is also Catholic? That's a good question.
Well, I think if this film would have been made in our country in the 1970s or 1980s, because we've been going through a process of secularization. I remember from my childhood there was still this connection to the church. Young boys were asked to serve in the church as an assistant to the vicar, for instance. So I can relate to that. But well, we've come a long way. So for that generation, I think it resonates in all kinds of ways, because although we are now in a very strong secularized society, various things are quite recognizable, I think. And I think one of the questions that is debated also in contemporary Poland: where are we going now? Are we also moving on the path of secularization? Will we end up where other countries such as Belgium, or they usually refer to Ireland, which was a very strong Catholic country, but which is also moving in a different direction? So this is at stake, I think, in contemporary Polish debates. But we have left this debate behind. I think it must have taken place somewhere in the 1970s, after, well, the 68, of course, was a very important event in that sense. But I don't know how young people would relate to that. Perhaps because there is also this very strong depiction of contemporary youth culture, music. So that would be something that resonates with them.
But what's fascinating is that all the juveniles in the prison, the institution, that they were all, most of them seem to be very true in their Catholicism, in the way that they wanted to pray. So they're all getting up and saying their prayers before having their food. So younger people in Poland, are they still as religious, or is there a change? Because usually it starts with youth culture sort of going different directions.
Well, this is a very interesting question. I can't answer it, of course, because I don't have a day-to-day contact with what's going on in Poland. But there have been a lot of protests over the past few weeks, and a lot of young people have been involved. And this relates, there has been a court ruling about abortion, which is now made practically impossible. And this was also related to the influence of the church. So there have been massive protests over the past 2 or 3 weeks, and one of the main features of this protest movement, that it was not simply feminist, so related to abortion, but there were a lot of young people involved. So there is a huge debate going on at this moment in Poland. What does this mean? Are we losing those young people? Are they growing up in a global pop culture, not relating anymore to Catholicism as a religion, and also in terms of community? Is this a sign of the times?
Was the film, do you know if the film was criticized by more conservative voices in Poland? You said it's clever in how it sort of makes sure that you don't have to there's no good and no bad, there's a good balance, but were there maybe voices that were much more critical?
Well, I haven't read all reviews, of course, but I think, generally speaking, most reviewers were positive, as far as I can see. And I think this is also related to the fact that, like I said at the beginning, this film is quite balanced in its portrayal of the Polish Church, because over the past few years, there have been a couple of films which have been much more controversial. There has been a very heavily debated film by Wojciech Smarzowski, which is called Clare in Polish, Clergy, and it's a very harsh attack on the Polish Church in all respects. It's about pedophilia, it's about power abuse, it's about financial malversations, it's about alcoholism, also about abortion. So this film has been, on the one hand, that's also a kind of a paradox. It's now on the third place in the ranking of the most popular films since the end of communism. So it occupies the third position. It was viewed by more than 5 million people. But it was, of course, severely attacked from the conservative side for obvious reasons, because the film is very grotesque in its depiction of the position of the church in contemporary Poland. It borders on caricature. So I think that's why Corpus Christi was by most people received as some kind of relief, because Clergy appeared in 2018, and then 1 year later we had this more moderate, balanced description, portrayal of the church. Also this idea of reconciliation, not focusing on polarization, black and white portrayals, but trying to offer a balanced portrayal, not black and white. And there is another very controversial film, a bit older, from 2013 by Małgorzata Szumowski. Together with Smarzowski, she's one of the leading figures in contemporary Polish cinema. And she made a film which is called W imię, In the Name of. And it's about a priest, a young priest who is struggling with his homosexuality and eventually comes out of the closet. But this film was also very... let's say much more negatively received when compared to Corpus Christi.
Okay, Professor Van Heuckelom, I want to thank you for your very interesting background and your analysis tonight. There are lots of interesting comments that people have been writing in the chat. So thank you very much for your for the cooperation and for the interaction. I will hope that people will read what other people have written. And I want to invite you to next week's screening. It's another screening on the exhibition series. It's a Romanian film. It's called The Great Communist Bank Robbery. And it's a fascinating documentary about a very weird page in Romanian history. So I hope to see you then next week. Thank you very much for being here tonight.